Easy, boy. What is it? The barking would not stop. Officer Grace Turner slammed her cruiser door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet forest road like a warning. The cold night air bit at her skin, sending shivers down her spine as she stepped onto the uneven dirt path. A thin fog curled around the trunks of the trees, winding through the underbrush and drifting across the ground like ethereal fingers. Her flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the mist, illuminating patches of damp leaves and broken twigs. Then it landed on something that made her stomach twist. A German shepherd, standing rigid, fur bristling, teeth bared, eyes fixed on an enormous old oak tree that seemed to loom taller than the rest, like it had absorbed decades of secrets and darkness. "Easy, boy," Grace murmured, her voice calm but her pulse hammering in her chest. One hand rested on her holster, not because she feared Rex, she knew his loyalty and bravery, but because the night carried a tension that prickled the skin and set her senses on high alert. "What is it?" Rex did not move. He did not blink. He did not break his stare. Rex was not just any dog. He had served with distinction as a canine officer for over 7 years, tracking criminals, sniffing out evidence, and saving lives. After his previous handler died unexpectedly, Grace had taken him in. It was meant to be temporary at first, but over time they became inseparable. He followed her everywhere, a silent guardian and a partner who had seen more than most humans ever would. But tonight, something had drawn him into the woods, ignoring every command, barking with a desperation that made her heart ache. The dog had bolted from her yard like he had been shot from a cannon, weaving through the underbrush, crashing through fallen branches, and refusing to turn back. He had led her here, to this ancient oak whose bark was gnarled, twisted, and scarred with age. Now he stood trembling, muscles taut, staring at the base of the tree like it held the answers to some unspeakable mystery. Grace lifted her flashlight higher, letting the beam climb the trunk, and froze. There was a lump. Not natural. Not like any growth she had ever seen. This bulge at the base of the oak was misshapen, covered with moss and grime, streaked with lines of dirt like dried tears. It was too deliberate, too solid. It looked like something had been swallowed whole and left to rot inside the tree. Her heart skipped a beat. "What on earth?" she whispered, stepping closer, boots crunching over the damp leaves. She reached out, her fingers brushing the rough bark, and felt it. Smooth. Cold.
Metal. A chill ran down her spine. Not the normal shiver from the freezing air. Something deeper, something primal told her, this is wrong. She backed away and lifted her radio, calling it in. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Within minutes, distant sirens sliced through the fog. 2 patrol cars arrived, lights reflecting off the mist, casting long shadows that danced across the tree trunks. Officer Mitchell and Officer Harris stepped out, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and concern. Behind them, a local fireman carried a small cutting saw, compact but powerful. "Grace," Mitchell said, eyebrows raised, "you said metal in the tree?" "See for yourself," she said, trying to steady her shaking hands. Rex barked sharply, claws scrabbling at the bark, his whole body vibrating with tension. The sound of claws on wood made Grace's chest tighten. She knelt for a closer look, feeling the metallic edge beneath the moss. It was unmistakable. The fireman knelt beside the bulge. "Could be old scrap," he said cautiously, "but it feels deliberate." Rex growled low, a sound that made everyone pause. "Just cut carefully," Grace instructed, swallowing hard. Her throat was dry, her body tense like coiled steel. The saw roared to life. The smell of old wood and gasoline filled the air. Chips of bark and flakes of moss fell to the ground, cascading like tiny waterfalls of decay. Every inch they peeled away seemed to reveal more of the mystery beneath. Rex barked louder with every scrape of the saw, his eyes never leaving the bulge. Then it happened, a metallic clink. The team froze. Grace knelt again, brushing off the remaining bark with gloved hands. Slowly, letters became visible, faint but legible. Missing since 1987. Property of Elliot Hawkins. Grace's stomach dropped. Her throat tightened. That name. She had read it countless times in old files, a name whispered in hushed tones around the department for decades. Elliot Hawkins, a 10-year-old boy vanished from this very forest 38 years ago. Posters, search parties, hope, all gone. His parents had never lived to see him return, their lives eroded with grief and unanswered questions. Her hands shook as she processed the reality. "It can't be," she whispered. The fireman continued cutting, slowly, carefully, until a rusted metal box fell free from the tree, hitting the ground with a dull thud that echoed ominously through the forest.
Grace knelt again, her hands trembling as she lifted the rusted metal box from the ground. The decay of the red scarf inside made it fragile to the touch, but she handled it carefully, reverently, as if she were holding the weight of decades of lost time. The small wooden toy truck inside was worn and faded, its paint chipped and dulled by years hidden in darkness. The school ID card, yellowed with age, bore the boy's name, Elliot Hawkins. But it was the folded note sealed inside plastic that drew her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. She unfolded it slowly, hands shaking, and read the words written in a small, almost childlike scrawl. "If anyone finds this, please tell my mom I tried to come home, but the man said I couldn't. He locked me here. I heard sirens once. I yelled, but no one heard me. I'm scared. My name is Elliot Hawkins." Grace's throat tightened. She felt as though the forest had exhaled around her, the fog clinging to her like a cold embrace. Her knees ached from kneeling, her heart pounded as the reality of the note sank in. This boy, this child, trapped, forgotten, had left a message that no one had found for 38 years. Even Rex stopped barking. He rested his snout on the ground, his ears twitching. Grace reached down and scratched behind his ears, whispering, "Good boy, Rex, you found him." Tears ran down her cheeks, the cold night forgotten, as grief and relief battled within her. The fireman knelt beside her. "The tree, it grew around the box," he said softly, almost reverently. "Decades of growth, swallowing it whole." Grace nodded numbly. She couldn't even imagine the boy's suffering. Her mind ran through every detail she had ever learned about Elliot Hawkins. Missing posters, media coverage, search parties, dead ends. His parents had passed without answers, never knowing what happened to their child. And now, decades later, a retired canine had led her here, revealing the truth hidden in plain sight. But Rex was not done. The German shepherd padded to the opposite side of the tree, sniffing the ground with methodical intensity. His paws scraped at the damp earth as he began to dig furiously, dirt flying in every direction. Grace rushed over, flashlight shaking in her hands, shining the beam on the frantic scene. Something small and white poked through the soil. Bones. Tiny bones. Grace's stomach turned, a chill crawling up her spine. She dropped to her knees, brushing away the dirt until she saw it, a child's sneaker, half buried, its rubber decayed, but unmistakably a child's. On the sole were carved initials, E.H. The officers went silent. One whispered, "He was right here all along." Grace could not hold back her tears anymore. She sank to her knees beside Rex, one hand resting on his back. "You found him, boy. After all these years, you found him." The night air felt heavier now, filled with a mixture of relief, grief, and a profound silence that seemed to honor the boy. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl of an owl carried the weight of decades of unanswered questions. Grace traced her fingers over the sneaker and the rusted box, feeling the cold metal, the rough wood, and the decayed fabric, a tangible connection to a life that had been stolen too soon. The firemen and officers began documenting everything carefully. They photographed the remains, took soil samples, and secured the toy truck and ID card. The note, plastic sealed, was handled with gloves to preserve what little had survived time. The careful preservation of these items was a solemn ritual, a way to honor a life lost and a mystery finally solved.
Rex lay down beside Grace, his head resting on her knee. She whispered again, "You gave him a voice, Rex. You gave his family answers they never had." Her hand stroked his fur, running along the lines of his strong back, feeling the quiet strength of her loyal partner. Morning light began to seep through the trees, the fog lifting to reveal the dense forest in its full somber beauty. News traveled fast. By dawn, the forest was cordoned off. Yellow tape wound around the clearing, and a small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered at a distance, murmuring in hushed tones. Local media, police forensics, and historical researchers arrived, each eager to document the unprecedented discovery. Experts confirmed the remains belonged to Elliot Hawkins. The note, protected by the plastic, had preserved his final words. The box, swallowed by the tree, had withstood the decades, the growth of nature itself acting as a silent guardian. The decades-old mystery, cold for nearly 4 decades, had been solved because one dog refused to stop barking, one canine refused to ignore the call of his instincts. Grace stood silently beside Rex as experts worked. She thought about the child who had left those words, the life that had been lost in shadows, the parents who never knew. She thought about Rex, a retired canine, a hero who had found the missing link in a chain of mystery that had eluded humans for generations. She felt a mixture of awe, grief, and gratitude. The forest around her seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with the discoveries of the day. Birds chirped cautiously as the first sunlight filtered through the branches. A breeze carried a faint scent of pine and earth, mingling with the remnants of decayed bark and soil. Grace could feel the weight of history pressing down upon her, and yet there was relief in the closure.
Rex nudged her hand gently, drawing her attention. She looked down at him, his eyes intelligent and calm, his loyalty unwavering. "Good boy, Rex," she whispered, and felt an odd sense of peace. She placed the toy truck and ID card gently in a secure evidence bag, knowing that these remnants of a life lost would finally tell the story that had been silenced for decades. Every detail mattered, every small object a testament to the boy who had disappeared and the canine who had refused to ignore the truth. By midday, the forest had transformed into a scene of quiet reverence. Officers and forensic teams moved carefully, cataloging each piece of evidence. News crews, while kept at a distance, broadcast the story, the mystery of Elliot Hawkins reaching the wider community that had long forgotten the boy. Social media began to buzz with curiosity and heartbreak, stories shared, retold, and discussed. Through it all, Grace remained by the tree, eyes tracing the lines of its gnarled bark. The forest held a secret, but that secret had finally been revealed. She knelt beside her, placing her hand on his strong back. "You gave him back his story, Rex," she whispered. "You gave peace to a family who never got answers." The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a laugh, light and childlike, as if carried from another time. Grace paused, eyes closing briefly, taking in the whisper of the past. She imagined Elliot's voice, finally heard after decades, thanking them for finding him, for giving him a voice when no one else could. As the day drew on, Grace placed a small plaque near the base of the tree. "In memory of Elliot Hawkins, lost but never forgotten." She stepped back and watched the sunlight glint off the metal box, the toy truck, and the ID card, each one a testament to the life that had been lost and finally acknowledged. Rex lay beside her, tail brushing the forest floor, calm now. Grace whispered softly, "Good job, partner." For the first time in decades, the forest was still, silent, respectful, and filled with a sense of closure that had long been absent.
The following days were surreal for Grace Turner. News of the discovery had spread rapidly across the county, reaching every local newsroom, radio station, and social media feed. Headlines shouted of the decades-old mystery finally solved, of a brave dog leading the way to the truth. Grace watched the coverage from her kitchen, Rex lying at her feet, ears twitching at every mention of his name. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands still shaking slightly, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. People called her, friends and colleagues alike, offering congratulations, awe, and sometimes disbelief. "I cannot imagine what that must have been like," one reporter said, "to stand there after decades with the truth in your hands. Incredible." Grace smiled weakly, her mind still with the forest, the old oak, and the child who had been lost for so long. She thought about Elliot Hawkins constantly. She thought about his parents, who had passed never knowing whether their son had survived or perished in the shadows. She imagined the fear he must have felt, trapped and unheard, and her heart ached for him. Yet there was relief in knowing that finally his story would be told. Finally, he would be remembered. At the forest, the investigation continued in earnest. Forensic teams returned daily, carefully cataloging every artifact and bone fragment. Historians and anthropologists were called in to document the unique preservation of the metal box within the tree. Scientists marveled at the way nature had both hidden and protected the evidence over decades, a combination of human cruelty and natural guardianship preserved in the bark of a single ancient oak. Grace and Rex visited the site often. Each time she stepped into the clearing, memories of that night, Rex's frantic barking, the flash of metal beneath moss, the first glimpse of the rusted box returned vividly. She often crouched beside the base of the tree, resting her hand on the thick, gnarled bark, imagining the child who had once been here, imagining what he might say if he could speak. She whispered, "You're finally free, Elliot. Finally, you're heard." Rex sat beside her, eyes calm, and she felt his presence as both comfort and protection. The community rallied around the discovery. Volunteers helped maintain the site, ensuring it remained undisturbed. Local schools organized visits, teaching children about history, perseverance, and the bravery of both humans and animals. Grace sometimes joined, telling the story in careful, sensitive terms, emphasizing courage and loyalty. Rex, ever stoic, became a local hero in his own right. Children would approach him slowly, hesitant at first, then smiling as he wagged his tail and allowed gentle pats. Grace's department recognized her officially for her actions, awarding her a medal for dedication and service. Rex, of course, received special recognition as well, a paw-shaped plaque at the station commemorating his heroism. Grace smiled as she pinned the medal on his collar during a small ceremony, whispering, "Good job, boy. You gave a lost child his voice back." Evenings were the hardest. Grace often found herself sitting on her porch, staring at the horizon, replaying that night in her mind. She thought of the boy's voice, captured in the decayed note, and the bravery of a dog who refused to ignore instinct. She considered the weight of decades, the way a single event could ripple through time, affecting countless lives. She thought of the parents, and she allowed herself a quiet moment of grief for them, even though she had never met them. Her dreams were haunted by fragments of the forest, flashes of fog, rusted bark, and a small boy reaching out, asking for help. But each morning she awoke with a sense of purpose renewed, knowing that the story had been uncovered, that truth had finally triumphed. Rex would nuzzle her arm, grounding her in reality, reminding her that she had not done this alone. Months passed. The forest became a memorial site. Grace organized a small dedication ceremony, inviting community leaders, families, and volunteers who had supported the search and investigation over the decades. A small plaque was placed near the tree, etched in bronze, in memory of Elliot Hawkins, lost but never forgotten. Grace spoke softly at the ceremony. "This tree, this forest, has held a secret for decades. But today, we honor a child who was taken from us too soon. And we honor a dog who refused to let the world forget him. May we always remember that even the smallest voice can be heard, and even the most forgotten can be found." Applause echoed through the trees, mixing with the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds, a natural symphony that seemed to acknowledge the event. Parents held their children closer, understanding in a new way the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance, empathy, and courage. For Grace, the most profound moments came in silence. Alone, beside Rex, she would kneel and place a hand on the tree's rough bark. She would close her eyes and imagine Elliot running freely, laughing, finally safe. And in those moments, she felt the faintest echo of a childlike giggle carried on the wind, soft and fleeting, a whisper of gratitude from a soul finally at peace. Rex, ever alert, would sit beside her, head tilted, eyes bright with understanding. Grace would smile, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of closure intertwine. "You did it, Rex," she would whisper. "You brought justice, closure, and peace." And though he could not speak, she felt certain he understood. The story of Elliot Hawkins continued to inspire. News outlets featured the tale repeatedly, highlighting not just the tragedy, but the hope, bravery, and loyalty that led to its resolution. Authors, filmmakers, and educators cited the case as an example of perseverance, intuition, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Grace often reflected on the unlikely sequence of events that had led her and Rex to the truth. A retired canine, a devoted officer, a single moment of instinct that refused to be ignored. Each factor was crucial. She realized that sometimes the world reveals answers in mysterious ways, and the smallest acts of courage can echo across decades. Years later, Grace would return to the forest with new recruits, sharing the story of Elliot Hawkins, demonstrating patience, intuition, and respect for evidence. Rex, older now but still sharp, would accompany her, a living testament to loyalty and service. She spoke to them of the boy who was lost, the power of observation, and the quiet heroism of a dog who refused to abandon hope. And every time she walked past the oak tree, she would pause, brush her hand across the plaque, and feel the story live on, not in sorrow, but in remembrance, closure, and peace. That night, as Grace and Rex walked home, the forest was silent for the first time in decades. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it a whisper, faint but unmistakable. A sound of laughter, a thank you from a boy finally free. A voice once lost, now heard forever. "Good job, partner," Grace whispered, tears mixing with a smile. Rex wagged his tail once, satisfied. Together, they walked into the night, leaving behind a forest that had finally found peace, carrying with them the story of a child, a hero dog, and a secret that had endured for generations.